This video is our first look at factoring trinomials. We've been asked to factor this trinomial. Now remember, factors are things that when you multiply them, they give you the suggested answer. So like factors of 12, you could say would be maybe 3 and 4 would be one example, because 3 times 4 is 12. So we've been asked to find two things that when you multiply them together, you get this answer. Or maybe three things in some cases that multiply together and give us this answer. The first rule of all factoring problems is always to look for the GCF. If there is a GCF, you should always do it first. Now, some problems aren't going to have one, so we're not going to be able to do that. But that should be your first look at every problem. And in this problem, we do have a GCF. The GCF is 5. 5 goes into everything. So I'm going to factor out a 5, and that would leave me in here with x squared minus 3x minus 10. So again, this is kind of like the backwards of distributive property. If I distribute that 5 back in, I'm back to where we started. Next step, I'm looking for some more factors. Now this 5 is just going to hang out for a bit. And we're looking for two things that when we multiply them, get us back to that trinomial of x squared minus 3x minus 10. For this video, this first term is always going to be an x squared. And what that does is it really helps us know the first bit over in the next step. If it's x squared, that tells me this has to be x and this has to be x. Because if you think about foiling this back, the f in FOIL comes from this term times this term. So x times x would get me that x squared. Now, the rest of this is where we have to do a little bit of thinking. I need to come up with two numbers that when I put in here and then FOIL all this, I get these guys. We're going to start with the L in FOIL. In this case, it's negative 10. So we're going to come over here. I'm just going to write this out to the side. We're looking for two things that multiply to negative 10. Well, if it's negative, we know that one of them has to be positive and one of them has to be negative if they're going to multiply to give me a negative 10. Now I can think of a few things that multiply to give me negative 10, and number-wise I could do 1 and 10, or we could do 2 and 5. Now we have to pick carefully because we've got to think about this middle here. So I want two things that multiply to give me that negative 10, but when I put the outside and inside of FOILs together, I get this negative 3x in the middle. So I'm looking at this list of factors and looking for a negative 3. And I think this 2 and 5 is going to do it for us. Now you have to be careful. We want a negative 3. So if I want a negative 3, I'm going to have to put the 5 with the negative sign and the 2 with the positive. A shortcut way of thinking about that is whoever's bigger, 2 or 5, so 5's bigger, has to have a sign that matches this middle. So since my 5 is bigger, I want him to control the sign, and I want a negative 3, so I need a negative 5 over here. Once I know that, I can bring those numbers back in here. So positive 2 and negative 5. And this is the factored form for that trinomial. Now on a test, if you had extra time, you could check this by foiling these two terms and then pulling your 5 back in after you foiled it. So if you FOIL these two terms and combine like terms, you'd get back to this. And then if you pull your 5 through, you'd get back to this. Let's try another one. Again, first thing we're always looking for is GCF. And in this case, it looks like I have one here as well. I've got a 4. So I'm going to pull this 4 out because 4 goes into everything. That's going to leave me with x squared minus 4x plus 4. Now again, we're starting with an x squared, so I know this has to be an x and this has to be an x. Next, I've got to think about this L in FOIL, and the L in FOIL here is a positive 4. So I'm looking for two things that multiply to give me positive 4. Let's talk signs first. If we're going to get a positive 4, it tells me that both of the things that I'm multiplying have to be positive, or they both might be negative. And in this problem, if I'm going to get a negative 4 here in the middle, that tells me that over here, these are both going to have to be negative. A negative times a negative would give me that positive 4, but I need those negatives to give me this negative middle term. All right, let's talk factors. So things that multiply to 4, well, it's got to be 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. So I'm looking for which set in this list, when I put them together, would give me this 4 in the middle. So I think I need 2 and 2. And because the signs are both negative, I don't have to worry about where I'm putting specific ones. We're just throwing them back in there. So I know over here this is going to be negative 2 and negative 2. After you've done a bunch of these, this step over here, you may be able to kind of do in your head, and you may be able to get straight to this answer over here without having to show all that, and that's fine. But in the beginning, it might help you out to show all that. There is my factored answer. Now, if you wanted to be super fancy, you could write this a different way. You could write this like this. Because remember, this times itself is that thing squared. Just like 5 squared is 5 times 5. X minus 2 times x minus 2 is x minus 2 squared. That means take this times itself. This answer is totally correct and absolutely fine, but so is this version. Either one is fine. Doesn't matter to me. If you want to be all fancy, you can write it like this, but this one's also okay. Let's do one more. This one actually is a little tricky because of this right here. So we're going to work through this the same that we've done the others. So don't panic with this, but we are going to have to talk about that guy here in a minute. First things first, is there a GCF? I wish there was, but there's not. These guys both have Y's, but this guy doesn't, so can't take a Y out. These guys have X's, but this guy doesn't, so we can't take an X out. So there's no GCF. Now it is just an X squared at the beginning, so we know it's going to be X and X. Let's talk about the next step here, the L in FOIL. The L in FOIL number-wise is a positive 9. We'll worry about that Y here in a minute. So I'm looking for two things that multiply to give me a positive 9. Now I look in the middle to tell me, do I have both positive or both negative? So I'm looking for a positive 9, but I need it to be a positive 6 in the middle. That tells me over here I need both positives. So in the plus sign in the back tells me I got same signs, both positive or both negative, and this tells me which set I have. Since I know they're both positive, let's think number-wise. 9 would be 1 times 9 or 3 times 3. And if I'm looking to get a 6 in the middle, I think I need this set. So we need 3 and 3. Now, 3 times 3 gets me that 9. But we still have this y to deal with. Just like x times x is x squared, y times y would be y squared. So instead of just throwing the 3 back in, I'm going to throw in a 3 with the y. Now think about if you were to FOIL this. X times x would give me this x squared. X times 3y and x times 3y would both be 3xy's. And when you put those two together, you would have 6xy's from the middle two terms. And last, you would have 3y times 3y, which would give you 9y squared. So there is your factored form. Again, this one's one of those fancy ones because those match. You could write it like this. Anything times itself is that thing being squared. Either answer, again, is fine, just kind of a preference. So don't let that y flip you out. Just tackle this like we've done all the others. And then once you know what your numerical bits to the factors are, understand that just like x times x is x squared, we need y times y to get y squared.